Hey YouTube, this time I'm going to use a script. On this subject, I have a lot to say, and I don't want to risk leaving anything out. I am a Bernie supporter. I have been ever since he started his campaign. I have been against Clinton's presidency since 2008. In 2008, Clinton did not fail just because she was up against Obama. Her failure there was not relative. Now let me qualify this before anyone calls me sexist. I'm all for the first woman president, but this does not mean that I will throw my support behind the first female candidate who happens along. Ladies, consider, what is your opinion of Palin? I happen to believe she's a fuckwit. I happen to believe she is not capable of opening her mouth without embarrassing her party and her country. I would accuse her of embarrassing herself, but I don't believe she's smart enough for that. After endorsing Trump, she declared that she would like to serve as Secretary of Energy. And she went on to declare that her first action would be to abolish that department because the oil and coal industries don't need government interference. Never mind that what the Department of Energy actually does is regulate the nation's nuclear arsenal. I look at Palin and see someone who would accidentally leave the nation's nuclear arsenal unregulated, and dare to believe this would probably not be a good idea. Does this make me sexist? I would suggest a president like Elizabeth Warren, but then Warren went and endorsed Clinton. In 2008, Hillary Clinton was not only the former First Lady, she was a former senator whose time in office had seen her support of the USA Patriot Act, its authorization in 2001 and its reauthorization in 2006, and her support of the invasion of Iraq. Ladies, consider, how many of you have been on board with either of these? Personally, I have yet to hear so much as an apology. Now, let me explain for anyone out of the loop. The USA so-called Patriot Act gave the federal government the authority to tap, without warrant, any phone in the country. This was done under the auspices of protecting the country from terrorist attacks, but I know this is not its actual purpose. And what's more, I know that she knows this is not its actual purpose, because her husband knows this is not its actual purpose, because there were no devastating terrorist attacks while he was president, unless you want to count the bombing in Oklahoma City and the first attack on the World Trade Center in New York City. Now, let's consider those for a moment. The Oklahoma City bomber acted alone. He did not need any help from anyone. The bombing raid in the parking garage in the World Trade Center was one act. In each case, the perpetrators did not need help from anyone else. If they had known that the government could have been tapping their phones, they could have accommodated that with ease. That is to say, the bombings in Oklahoma City and New York City could have easily been planned without phone use or with minimal use. Thus, I can be secure in the knowledge that this act was actually intended to spy on those not equipped to elude intelligence gathering operations. I therefore infer that Clinton doesn't hold personal privacy in very high regard. Now, when Bill Clinton was president, there was no devastating terrorist attack, not of the 9/11 caliber for which Bush has become famous. Now, some Bush devotees would like to blame this attack on Clinton, but let's take a look at the timetable. These attacks did not happen 9 hours into Bush's presidency or 9 days or even 9 weeks into it. No, they happened 9 months into it. After 9 months, you no longer get to blame the predecessor. Observe that during Clinton's presidency, Al-Qaeda existed, but virtually no one heard of them. There's a reason for that. Al-Qaeda, until Bush was elected, was just another terrorist network in a world of terrorist networks. If you do your job properly in gathering intelligence, no one will ever hear about them. They became a problem during the age of Bush because Bush didn't do his job properly. Bush and company took over, and Clinton and company turned over all the intelligence they had, and Clinton made the mistake of assuming that Bush was serious about protecting this country from harm. Then Bush and company looked at all this exhaustive intelligence that Clinton and company had on Al-Qaeda and scoffed at this ridiculous obsession everyone seemed to have, laid it all aside, and ignored it. For 9 months, they ignored it. Then the 9/11 attacks happened, 3,000 US citizens died, and the Bush staff started falling all over themselves to blame Clinton. This was when the GOP started trying to pass the Patriot Act, and wouldn't you know, Senator Hillary Clinton actually supported the damn thing. We must have more intelligence. The problem is we don't have enough intelligence. No, clearly, the problem is that you refuse to act on the intelligence you do have. When the intelligence paints a perfectly complete picture of Al-Qaeda planning to hijack 3 planes from Chicago O'Hare, but you don't see it because you have opted to ignore all intelligence about Al-Qaeda, the problem is not your intelligence network. But then came more blowback about 9/11. The US tracked Al-Qaeda to Afghanistan, and then, in no mood to negotiate, we invaded. And then, in no mood to think, we came under the impression that Iraq had something to do with it. They hadn't, but that didn't matter to us. Once we had concluded that they had, no amount of reason and evidence was going to convince us otherwise. Now, before I continue, I should admit that at the time, I was one of the idiots who supported the invasion of Iraq. Why? Well, let's take a look at the reasons we were given. We were told that Iraq had something to do with 9/11, since Saddam Hussein was allegedly good friends with Osama bin Laden. Since then, I have found that, actually, they were political rivals, and I struggle to see what messages you send to a terrorist network by retaliating to a devastating attack by taking out one of that network's rivals. We were told that Iraq was making weapons of mass destruction, but then we occupied Iraq for years, and as far as I know, we have yet to find a single one, even though after the leader of Iraq went into hiding, we managed to find him. We were told that we were going to topple a power-mad dictator. But if that's the reason, what about all the other countries in which all the other countries that are still run by power-mad dictators that we don't seem interested in? We were told that we would be welcomed as liberators by people all over the country, all set for democracy. I guess we should have asked how many people in Iraq would have welcomed us this way, because of course this can be the case if only one small child is so welcoming. There is footage of US troops rolling into Baghdad and being welcomed, but then the entire country turned against us as the occupiers we were, and this was the relationship for the rest of the war. And then came the final insult. We were told that, well, maybe none of the other reasons were true, but we absolutely had to stay, because if we pulled out, the extremists in Iraq would follow our troops home. Oh no! I supported the invasion of Iraq, because I was sure that the people wanted democracy. I supported the invasion because I was under the impression that this was the reason our troops were going. I saw newscasts that pitted veterans arguing against the occupation against senators arguing for it, and it pissed me off that these were their choices. I was sure that there were veterans out there who wanted this occupation, and senators who didn't, and this news organization was cherry picking these people instead. America, please, don't forget this, because it's just a matter of time before someone pulls this bullshit again. Some war profiteer is going to use an absolutely devastating attack to give this country every reason to invade another country that is completely unprepared for war, and then every reason to remain after we realize what a terrible mistake invading has been. But hang on, I've gotten off topic. You see, Iraq did not at the time have anything to do with the war on terrorism. It does now, thanks to us, but it did not at the time. This was not enough to prevent Clinton from supporting its invasion when she really should have known better. This is why I supported Obama in 2008. He was in a position to know better, and he did. I was not in a position to know better, and this is the only reason I did not. But Clinton was also in a position to know better, and yet she did not. That was in 2008. Now in 2016, what's this I'm hearing about Clinton conducting private email on a secure server? Well, sounds like she's rapidly on her way down. So I'm still a Bernie supporter. And if you check the web, I'm not alone. I live in a state that went to Bernie in the primaries, and it wasn't even contested. Poll after poll after poll shows him to be more electable than Clinton. Poll after poll after poll shows him to have a greater lead over Trump than Clinton has. Bernie Sanders has never supported the Patriot Act or the invasion of Iraq. Bernie Sanders supports full universal health care. Bernie Sanders supports making all education free. Now, let me take a moment to explain why this is not just pandering. This actually makes good economic sense. Making people in debt, because people in debt cannot be concerned with driving economic growth. If I have a huge mountain of debt hanging over my head, that means that any money I bring in has to be used to pay off my creditors instead of buying things that help the economy grow. If you want to take care of an economy, you have to begin by taking care of the consumers. All growth begins with them. But I cannot endorse the Bernie or bust crowd, and neither can he. This is why he has closed his campaign. He is counting on his supporters to be smart enough to check the web and understand that even if a majority of voters support him, there is still no way he can be elected president. Let's take a little trip back to the last time we had three major contenders for the presidency. It happened twice in a row, 1992 and 1996. Bill Clinton and H. Ross Perot ran. Both times, Bill Clinton won. No small part of this victory is frequently chalked up to the fact that Perot, as a conservative, drew conservative votes away from the other conservative candidate, and in so doing split the conservative vote and gave the election to Clinton. Hang on, let me illustrate this a little more clearly. Here we have two candidates. Candidate A is a registered tallywhacker and has 40% of the vote, and candidate B is a registered dingleberry and has 60%. At this point, candidate B is the clear winner. Oh, but what's this? Here comes a late arrival, candidate C, a registered dingbat. Candidate C's platform is quite unorthodox and doesn't speak to many of the electorate, but for some reason, he, or she for all I know, manages to draw votes away from candidate B, but oddly, not candidate A. Soon candidate B is down to 55%, while C has 5%. Then B is down to 50%, while C is up to 10%. By election day, candidate C is up to 21%, which brings B down to 39%, which suddenly makes candidate A the winner with a whopping 40%. Look at that. Candidate A won, even though the majority voted for someone else. Now, you may object to the lesser evil approach, but like it or not, it's what we have. But hang on, I'm not done. There's a pretty substantial case to be made against Trump as well. Donald Trump dares to imply when kicking off his campaign that Mexicans are rapists. Since then, he has sworn that he loves Mexicans. If it's true that he tells it like it is, then he must truly love rapists. He swears that we absolutely must have a wall built along our southern border, and that if elected, he will get Mexico to pay for it. First, I frequently hear conservatives singing the praises of states' rights. Why is it in this case this suddenly ceases to be an issue? Second, there are in fact several walls along the border with Mexico, but they are not connected, because this, I'm told, is a matter of states' rights. Third, 2 consecutive Mexican presidents have sworn, in more than one sense of the word, that Mexico will never pay for any such wall. Trump's response to this is that it only increases the size of the wall. I'm not seeing how any of this makes any of this more persuasive to Mexico. He also swears that Mexico is obligated given its trade deficit with the US, but I'm also not seeing any help in this, given my ignorance of any such instances where this has happened. Anywhere. With anyone. I believe the US has a trade deficit with China, but this does not exactly obligate us to pay for the construction of things there. Fourth, every week, several people from Mexico travel into the United States, but what is not usually reported is that several people from the United States also travel back. The last few months, the latter figure has been greater, because the last few months, Mexico has in fact been doing a better job of taking care of its people than the United States has. Don't believe me? Well, then you're probably a conservative who presumes that no one in the world can possibly rival us. So go ahead and vote for Trump, and when the last Mexican leaves this wonderful country thinking you people are fuckwits, go ahead and give him credit. Clearly, if at some point we manage to get this wall built, it will be to keep people in. Mexico was, in fact, making quite a lot of progress instituting universal health care before the Great Recession happened. This stalled these efforts, but now that the Great Recession has passed, the efforts are well underway again, and Mexico is way ahead of the US. Trump also insists that all Mexicans are Trump also insists that all Muslims are terrorists. Oh wait, I should not say all, he just insists that we need to screen the ones we let in. I'm not sure what a terrorist would look like, but that's what he insists we need to do. Never mind the 6th article of the First Amendment. Never mind the 6th article and the First Amendment of the Constitution. It's not as if the Founding Fathers had any idea what they were talking about, and it's not as if anyone in this country gives a shit about the Constitution anymore anyway. Not now that we have stopped teaching civics. He also wants to get rid of the minimum wage, and he wants to let colleges charge as much as they can get away with. Because, of course, debt is never detrimental to the economy. It's not as if someone with a ton of debt hanging over their heads ever has to worry about using the money they bring in to pay it off instead of buying things to actually stimulate economic growth. Of course, he doesn't believe in evolution or human-caused global warming either. Surround a man with people who are dedicated to not evolving, and these people will stop producing evidence of evolution. This man will thus stop believing that evolution takes place. By some miracle, Trump and Clinton are both still in the race. By an even greater miracle, Sanders isn't. I had only one real concern on the subject of a Sanders presidency: the man's age. People age faster in the presidency than in everyday life. For every year that passes, I swear the president ages 4. But don't be discouraged, Sanders supporters. We won't have our day this election, but we will have our day.